conversion of the analog world we live in into the digital realm is a fascinating process. In the case of video, it's also a terribly complex process involving discrete cosine transformations, electron cascades, and whatnot. Audio, on the other hand, is refreshingly simple, and a fundamental understanding of how digital audio works can ultimately improve how your audio sounds. Sound travels in waves transmitted through solids, liquids, or through the air. The speed of these waves is entirely determined by the media. At sea level on planet Earth, sound waves travel at 340 meters per second. We can easily measure the distance between the peaks of these waves and, based on the speed of the wave, deduce the frequency at which these waves pass. A sound wave that passes once a second measures 340 meters from peak to peak. This once per second rate can be described as a frequency of 1 hertz. Of course, an easier way to measure a sound wave and estimate its frequency is to listen to it. 3.4 meters between peaks is 100 hertz, which is a very low-pitched sound. Here's 1,000 hertz, or 1 kilohertz. And here's 5 kilohertz. 440 hertz is the A on a piano keyboard just above middle C. In order to record a sound, we simply need to measure the intensity and frequency of these waves with a microphone, and then convert that into digital data. Anytime we convert smooth analog waves into discrete chunks of digital data, we necessarily lose some information, however. No matter how sensitive our microphones or how accurate our conversion, digital audio is still only an approximation of the real thing. Every time we record a bit of information about a sound wave, we take a sample. The rate or frequency at which we take samples determines the accuracy of the recorded audio. You can already see this coming together. Sound waves are measured in hertz, and so is the sample rate of our digital recordings. Let's go back to that A at 440 hertz. A digital sample rate of 10 hertz is clearly going to fail to accurately represent a sound wave with a frequency of 440 hertz. What about a sample rate of 400 hertz or 800 hertz? The more samples we take, the greater the fidelity. In theory, the minimum sample rate required to accurately represent a sound is twice the frequency or pitch of that sound. This is known as the Nyquist rate and is based on the Nyquist-Shannon sampling theorem, which we're going to gloss over here. This theory does, however, give us something concrete to work with. For example, the highest note on a piano is 5 kilohertz, which can be accurately represented with a 10 kilohertz sample rate. Young people who haven't yet destroyed their hearing with iPods can hear sounds up to 20 kilohertz in frequency, which can be represented by a 40 kilohertz sample rate. CD audio comes in at 44 kilohertz, DVD video comes in at 48 kilohertz. The digital juice sound effects library comes in at twice that at 96 kilohertz. These higher sample rates not only push us well above the minimum required, but they also give our computers more computational overhead for performing the calculations required for mixing and effects. Can anyone hear the difference between a 44 kilohertz recording and a 96 kilohertz recording? Probably not. Is it worth the extra effort to go with these higher sample rates? Absolutely. So why is all of this important? At the end of the day, most of our projects are going to need to be digitally compressed, either for the internet or for portable media players. Therefore, we need to compress these files as much as possible while still maintaining as much quality as possible. One way we can do this is by saving the media using a lower sample rate. Cutting the sample rate in half from 44 kilohertz to 22 kilohertz will cut the file size down in half. Often this downsampling will work very well, but it can result in nasty and very audible aliasing artifacts. If you have any questions about this or any other technical topic, drop the Digital Juice Tech team an email or give us a call. And remember, there are no technical solutions to artistic problems, so don't let technology get in the way of your creativity. High-definition television is here, and as content providers, we need to get ready. The transition to HD should be a smooth one, however, for two reasons. First of all, the vast majority of households in the United States are still SD only. so the transition is going to be a gradual one. Most people are perfectly happy with their large screen televisions, their surround sound theater systems, and their large DVD libraries. The second reason the transition is going to be smooth is that it's going to be a digital transition. The professional software you're currently using is very likely already HD compatible. In this segment, we're going to talk about the fundamentals of HD production and the future of digital television. Here's the shortest definition of high definition that we can give. HD television has 700 or more lines of vertical resolution. There are three main digital television standards in the United States right now. One SD and two HD. The SD standard is known as 480i, and the two HD standards are known as 720p and 1080i. 480i has a resolution of 720 by 480, 720p has a resolution of 1280 by 720, and 1080i has a resolution of 1920 by 1080. We'll discuss what the I's and P's mean in just a second. Analog television in the United States was defined in the 1950s by the NTSC as having 525 lines of vertical resolution. When we translate that into the digital realm, we get about 480 pixels visible on the screen, thus the name 480i. Instead of drawing every line on the screen in order, interlacing first draws every other line on the screen and then goes back to the top and fills in those remaining lines. The interlacing process is very fast at 60 fields per second and is basically invisible to the eye. Clips with very fast motion can reveal interlacing when we look at freeze frames of the video. Here we see a very fast moving clip that clearly shows the interlacing. Here's field A, field B, and together they make up a frame. Interlacing looks horrible on freeze frames, especially when you zoom way in on the details, but it was and continues to be a brilliant technical innovation. 720p video has a frame size of 1280 by 720. The P in 720p stands for progressive scanning, which means that all of the horizontal lines are scanned in consecutive order from top to bottom. This is completely different from how interlacing works. Film is an inherently progressive format, which may explain why some people feel that progressive is a superior format to interlace. 1080i is the last important HD format that we're going to talk about. The frame size of 1080i is 1920 by 1080. The I, of course, once again refers to interlacing, which means that there are two fields that make up an individual frame. The ATSC, which defined digital television in this country, actually specified a whole range of frame sizes, frame rates, and interlace methods that could be used to broadcast digital television. It's really only useful to concentrate on the three we're discussing here, since these are the broadcast standards that the networks and cable companies have settled on. Unfortunately, while 480i standard definition television is universal, most stations have chosen to either go with 720p or 1080i, but not both. Most stations are broadcasting selected programs in the larger 1080i format, including PBS, CBS, NBC, and HBO. ESPN, ABC, and Fox went with the 720p format. Which brings us finally to distribution. Before you transform your studio into an HD production facility, you're going to need to decide how you're going to deliver your product. Now, don't get me wrong, HD footage looks great on SD formats. Hollywood movies on DVD prove this, and it's also likely that your clients are going to start asking for HD sooner rather than later. A couple of years ago, you would have had to spend many tens of thousands of dollars just to get started in HD production. Today, the number of sub $10,000 cameras from Canon, JVC, Panasonic, and Sony is really remarkable. And as far as editing is concerned, it's very likely that your current professional editing software is already HD compatible. Well, that brief introduction to HD is all we're going to cover today. If you have any additional questions about this or any other technical issues, feel free to drop the Digital Juice tech team an email or give us a call. And just remember, there are no technical solutions to what are fundamentally artistic problems. So don't let technology get in the way of your creativity.
Every sound, in every movie you've ever seen, was added in post.
Almost every sound in every movie you've ever seen was added in post-production. From footsteps falling and belts buckling to the click of a computer keyboard, sound effects added in post-production by a Foley artist are what make movies believable. In this segment, we're going to explore the Digital Juice sound effects library and show you how to find the sounds you need to finish your scene. Sound has always been a difficult part of the filmmaking process. Of course, the earliest films had no sound at all, but even with the latest technologies and the most talented sound recording artists, sound acquisition in the field during production can be extremely difficult, if not impossible. Even documentaries and unscripted reality programs make extensive use of sound effects libraries, such as the Digital Juice sound effects library, which contains 11,569 effects. Now, with that many effects, it can be difficult to find exactly the sound you need, and that's where our Juicer 3 software comes into play. The Juicer is a simple utility that lets you browse and audition your Digital Juice audio media, which is organized into categories. I like to turn on the handy autoplay feature when I work so I can quickly move from sound to sound using the arrow keys on my keyboard. Working like this can be creatively stimulating, but it isn't very efficient, especially if you're on a deadline. One of the most overlooked features of the Juicer is the little search box at the top of the browser panel here. Just type in a keyword and the Juicer will instantly return a list of related sound effects. One of the secrets of sound design is that you don't need to be 100% authentic and literal in your selection of sound effects to match on-screen action. In fact, in many cases, it's impossible or simply impractical to get literal matches. Think about science fiction movies or action movies for that matter. So when you enter a search term into the search box, you're going to need to be a little bit creative and open-minded about what you type in. What's the right sound effect? In the words of Duke Ellington, if it sounds good, it is good. Let's take a look at this clip of this couple rowing a boat on a lake and see what we can find. I'm going to start with boat, which brings up mostly motorboat sounds. So I try water, which gets me closer. There are some things here I might use. I'm definitely being generous with what I try because it is hard to know exactly what is going to work until you are back in your editing software looking at the video. As I look at the water clips, this gives me the idea to try splash. Some nice clips here. As I find elements I might use, I drag them over here to the batch list. Besides the foreground sound of the oars in the water, I'm going to need a little ambience. Again, I could just browse into the ambience category of effects and look for what I need, but it's more efficient to just use the search box again. I type in park and voila, ambience city park day. Once we've built up a decent batch list, we can grab all of the sounds we need off of the DVDs in the library and save them over to our hard drive by clicking the Render All button at the bottom of the juicer. The very large, high-quality source files are organized across the 10 DVDs in the library, but the juicer will prompt you to insert the correct discs. The juicer does have a couple of other features that I want to touch on here quickly. If we click the settings button here, it switches into a mode that allows us to modify the output. You can see that the default raw format for our sound effects library is 24-bit 96 kilohertz. If our project will eventually be distributed on DVD video discs or digital television, we can change our render settings to 16-bit 48 kilohertz. Since I usually work on the same kinds of projects over and over again and need exactly the same settings all the time, I'm also going to click this little twirly here and select Save as Default for this type, so I don't actually have to ever do this again. Well, that's as complex as the juicer gets for sound effects. I hope you can see how the simple search tool can really help move your next project forward more quickly. If you have any additional questions about this topic or any other technical topic, feel free to give the Digital Juice Tech team a call or simply drop us an email. And remember, there are no technical solutions to artistic problems, so don't let technology get in the way of your creativity. The film look is the holy grail of videography. While some technical geeks will tell you it's about 24p gamma and grain, the simple truth is videographers have screen envy. In this segment, we're going to explore the panoramic cinematic world of widescreen video and show you how you can maximize your small screen real estate. Movie theater screens aren't just larger than television screens, they actually have a wider aspect ratio. A standard definition television screen has an aspect ratio of 4:3, while a widescreen television has an aspect ratio of 16:9. If we do a little math to convert those and make the comparison easier, we come up with a 1.33 to 1 aspect ratio for standard definition television and a 1.78 to 1 aspect ratio for widescreen television. Hollywood films are not limited to these screen aspect ratios, however, and are usually wider than 16:9. For example, the panoramic deserts that stretch as far as the eye can see in Lawrence of Arabia fill the screen at a 2.20 to 1 aspect ratio. The 8 chariots with 4 horses abreast in Ben-Hur are captured on a screen with an aspect ratio of 2.76 to 1. Your first experience with widescreen television was probably a Hollywood movie on DVD. Most films today are shot at an aspect ratio of 1.85 to 1 or 2.4 to 1. These wider aspect ratio films simply don't fit on square television screens. You certainly can't simply resize the frame to fit, since this will significantly squash the image. One solution is to simply crop the frame. Besides destroying the artistry of the framing, this simply won't work in some situations. One neat trick is to move the 4:3 frame around to encompass different parts of the wider frame, depending on where the action is taking place. This is a process known as pan and scan, and is usually what is indicated when you see the warning, "This film has been modified from its original version. It has been formatted to fit your television." The other solution is to resize the image so the width fits within the frame, while still maintaining the aspect ratio. This necessarily results in blank areas at the top and bottom of a 4:3 frame and is known as letterboxing. Widescreen DVDs and HD broadcasts have settled on an aspect ratio of 16:9 for their screens, which seems like that would be the end of the discussion. Recall, however, that the ancient and inferior technology of Ben-Hur in 1959 used an aspect ratio of 2.76 to 1, which still won't fill the screen of your new $10,000 widescreen television. As Judah Ben-Hur might have said, "There's nothing new under the sun, and letterboxing is still the order of the day." In the realm of digital video, we're really limited by two factors. The first is how we shoot, and the second is how we distribute. HD and HDV cameras make the first factor a simple one. They all shoot in a 16:9 aspect ratio. The second factor, distribution, can be much more complex. If you're going out to HD broadcast or posting your videos on the internet, you really don't have any worries. But if you're creating DVDs for a standard definition audience, even one watching widescreen standard definition television, you're going to have to pay attention to the widescreen DVD specification. That, however, is a topic for another segment of Techno. If you have any questions about this or any other technical topics, feel free to drop the tech team an email or give us a call. And just remember, there are no technical solutions to artistic problems, so don't let technology get in the way of your creativity. High definition is unquestionably the future of television. But while your current HD audience is limited to about 6 million or so early adopting enthusiasts, nearly everyone owns a DVD player. This means that whether you're shooting SD or HD, dramatic widescreen DVDs are an excellent distribution format. In this segment, we're going to explore how widescreen DVDs work and how they can work for you. A frame of DVD video in the United States is defined as having 720 by 480 pixels. When displayed on a television screen, this comes out to a 4 by 3 or 1.33 to 1 aspect ratio. A frame of widescreen DVD video is also composed of 720 by 480 pixels. There aren't any more pixels used to achieve this widescreen effect. The technical trick here is to squeeze the widescreen frame down onto the 720 by 480 pixels in an anamorphic process. While anamorphic might sound like a fancy 21st century digital technique, it was actually invented in the early part of the 20th century for film. A 35mm frame of film actually projects a 4 by 3 image onto the screen, which is significantly smaller than the epic widescreen frame from Ben-Hur. The trick to getting Judah Ben-Hur and his chariot onto a 35mm print is to use an anamorphic lens to optically squash the image onto the film frame. Then, back in the theater, we'll screw another anamorphic lens onto the projector that optically reverses the process and expands the frame. Widescreen DVDs are produced in a completely analogous digital process. The camera shoots a widescreen 16:9 image which is digitally squashed onto the 4 by 3 frame. Then, at playback, your DVD player reverses this process. Editing and producing a widescreen DVD isn't any harder than producing a regular DVD. Just make sure your settings are correct in your editing environment. And playback's even easier since almost all DVD players automatically handle the widescreen process. None of the native 16:9 widescreen HD formats use an anamorphic process. And while it's clear that HD is the future of television, there are still over 90 million households in the United States that are DVD capable, which is about 85% market penetration. As a matter of fact, 2006 probably represents the year when the number of DVD-capable households surpasses the number of VCR-capable households. If you're shooting standard definition today, you should consider distributing your video in widescreen format. And if you're on the cutting edge and you're shooting HD video already, you should consider maximizing your audience by distributing widescreen DVDs. If you have any questions about this or any other technical topics, feel free to drop the tech team an email or give us a call. And remember, there are no technical solutions to artistic problems, so don't let technology get in the way of your creativity. Compositing is the process of combining two or more elements or layers into a final composition. Transparency is obviously an important part of compositing, and understanding a little bit about how transparency is generated by your software can help you get a grip on your graphics. In this segment of Techno, we're going to explain how alpha channel transparency works and how you can get perfect composites. All of the colors of the rainbow can be created on a canvas by mixing a few primary colors together. An analogous process happens in the electronic realm when we combine just a few fundamental colors into the full spectrum of color television and computers. On a computer monitor, we use a color space that consists of combining different values of red, green, and blue. Each discrete picture element, or pixel on your screen, has 256 possible values for each of these three color channels. So, for example, if we have a pixel that has a value of 0 for all three color channels, we get a black pixel. As we raise the amount of red in the pixel, it gradually gets brighter and brighter until we reach a maximum value of 255. If we assign 8 bits of information to each of these three color channels, we get a 24-bit RGB true color workspace that can represent millions of colors. Transparency can also be described by a range of values from 0 to 255, with 0 being completely transparent and 255 being completely opaque. So if we add another color channel to our color space, we can create variable transparency. The new 8-bit channel is called the alpha channel, and that gives us a total bit depth of 32 bits. The color space can be called 32-bit color, RGBA, or RGB+, and can represent millions of colors plus. In order to use variable transparency, you obviously need to select an image or video format that supports alpha channels. For example, the PNG format supports alpha channels in addition to the RGB color channels, while the DV format does not. How can you tell which formats support an alpha channel and which do not? One easy way is to open up our free Juicer software and play with some of the output options. I'm putting an animation on the batch list here in the Juicer and working with the QuickTime file format. The settings button calls QuickTime movie settings dialog. You can see the compression I'm using here is animation, which has a color depth of millions of colors plus, which is exactly what we need. There are some other compression types we could use if we wanted to. Just make sure that the color depth supports millions of colors plus. Of course, your editing software must also support our selected format and alpha channel transparency. Alpha channel support in consumer-level video editing applications is spotty at best, and most of those apps are not really well suited to complex compositing tasks anyhow. In many cases, the QuickTime file format, using a millions of colors plus codecs such as animation, will be perfect. For example, with applications like Apple Final Cut Pro, Adobe Premiere, and Sony Vegas. For Avid or Toaster users, you might want to go with the Windows AVI format and use full frames uncompressed to get an embedded alpha channel. In any case, your overlays should look not just good, but perfect. If they're not, drop the tech team an email or give us a call. We'd be happy to help you out with this or any other technical questions you might have. When you drop Editor's Toolkit Professional Overlay graphics into your timeline, they are automatically composited into your scene using standardized alpha channel technology. It really couldn't be easier to use. The toolkits do, however, contain more advanced elements that experienced editors can take advantage of. In this segment, we're going to explore the mattes and transitional wipes that are a part of each of the toolkits. These graphics are both fundamental and challenging to use, but if you're ready to take your editing to the guru level, this segment is for you. Mattes, or masks, have been used since the earliest days of film, and indeed were used as special effects in still photography before that. The basic concept is that you mask out part of the frame and substitute something else in its place. The earliest examples were landscapes painted onto glass. While glass matte painting artistry has advanced over the years, the same basic techniques of hand painting effects backgrounds remained the same until computers started making inroads in the early 1980s. While digital matte techniques are radically different from the glass of the past, the concept is still exactly the same. Fundamentally, we need to isolate part of the frame and make it transparent to a background layer. With a computer, you can decide which parts are going to be transparent and which parts are going to be opaque in a binary process. Let's say all of the black parts of the screen are going to be transparent, while all of the white areas are going to be opaque. We don't need to be limited to this on or off sort of transparency on a computer, however, and commonly work with finely graded variable transparency for smooth edges and effects. You'll recall that an animation with an alpha channel has 4 color channels: red, green, blue, and the alpha channel. We can separate all 3 color channels into grayscale images based on luminance that the computer adds color to. The alpha channel can also be visualized as a grayscale image that the computer adds transparency to. A matte, therefore, is just a visible alpha channel of sorts. Compare the standard automatically transparent lower third 2 from Superset 248 of the Editor's Toolkit 10 with the lower third matte 2 to see what I mean. This raises the obvious question, what are mattes for? First of all, not all editing applications support modern embedded alpha channel transparency in a 32-bit color animation. Most do. When you have a choice, I'd always recommend that you try the QuickTime format with an embedded alpha channel using a millions of colors plus codec. If that doesn't work, try the AVI format and an embedded alpha channel uncompressed. In those increasingly rare situations where you cannot use an embedded alpha, you can render the alpha out to a separate file. Guess what that separate alpha channel is going to look like? The black and white mattes and transitional wipes in the Editor's Toolkits are primarily creative tools, however. Here's the colored overlay 1 from Superset 115 in ETK5. It has an embedded alpha and is drag and drop easy to use, and it's trivial to shift the color around if you want. I can completely change the color and even the texture of the animation, however, by using the corresponding overlay matte from the superset by combining it with, say, Jumpback 836 from Volume 21 High Impact 8. You can see how the traveling overlay matte makes the white areas of the animation transparent to one clip and the black areas transparent to another. This is fundamentally how all of the fancy transition effects in your editing software work. Take a look at Full Screen Wipe 2 from Superset 138 in ETK6. Here's how the transitional wipe from that superset looks. It starts out mostly white and gradually shifts to mostly black. By making white areas transparent to one clip, our A roll, and dark areas transparent to another, our B roll, we get an interesting textured transition. Unfortunately, every editing application procedurally handles black and white mattes in a different way, right down to whether white is transparent or opaque by default. Fortunately, we do have explicit step-by-step tutorials up on our website for a handful of applications, including Avid, Premiere, Final Cut Pro, and Vegas. If we don't have a tutorial up yet for your software, check out your software's help system for mattes, track mattes, or traveling mattes for more information. Mattes are one of the oldest and most fundamental special effects techniques in film, and they are well worth the effort to understand and use. If you have any questions about this or any other technical topic, drop the tech team an email or give us a call. We'd be happy to help you out with this or any other technical questions you might have. Modern consumer camcorders shoot such beautiful images right out of the box that it's tempting, even for professionals, to leave the camera in automatic mode, point and shoot. There's a clear difference between America's funniest home videos and professional videography, however, and at least part of that difference is the quality of the light. In this Techno segment, we're going to briefly explore how color temperature of light affects what the camera records, and how a few fundamental, pragmatic techniques can make your video look more professional. The color temperature of light is commonly measured in kelvins based on the temperature scale named after the 19th century British physicist William Thomson, first bearing Kelvin. Although Kelvin's temperature scale works the same as any other temperature scale in that it measures thermal radiation, the color temperature of light does not necessarily correspond to how hot or cold the source is. Interestingly, one notable exception is the filament in your typical incandescent light bulb, which does have about the same color temperature as physical temperature, but that's just an interesting coincidence. Plain old soft white household incandescents have a color temperature of about 2800 kelvins, or 2800 K. Note that the unit here is the Kelvin, abbreviated with the uppercase K and not degrees or degrees Kelvin. The standard soft white bulb seems pretty white to the human eye and brain and would probably not be an issue if the camera had never been invented. The lights we're using in this studio have a color temperature of around 3200 K, which is standard for video studios. If we go outside and measure the color temperature of sunlight, we find that it's somewhere around 5500 K. From deep red to blinding blue, the Kelvin correlated color temperature scale describes a wide range of colors. Confusingly, while glowing red ambers are cooler than white-hot molten metals and blue stars, lighting designers, by convention, have decided to go with their artistic feelings on the subject. Red is described as warm, and blue is cool. The color of light is extremely important for videography. In order to calibrate our cameras correctly, we need to tell the camera something about the color temperature of the light that we are using so that it can accurately record a scene. It's not hard to do. After our lights are set up, we get out a white card, zoom in on it, and push the white balance button, which essentially tells the camera this is white. In our controlled studio environment with our 3200 K lights, there really isn't anything more to it. If we head outside into the 5500 K light of the early afternoon, we want to recalibrate the camera again and white balance. Let me show you what I mean. The blindingly bright light from our small yellow star sure seems white to the human eye, but to the camera, when we've left the white balance at 3200 K for our inside lights, things just don't look exactly right. White balancing is easy enough, however. We get out our white card again, zoom in, and voila, we're white balanced. Now, in a controlled shoot such as this one, white balancing isn't an issue because we can do it before we actually start shooting. But for event videographers who frequently have to move from an outside situation to inside or vice versa, white balance can be a real problem. There are two solutions to this. One is to leave the camera temporarily perhaps in auto white balance mode. The other is to simply edit out the transition. Most consumer camcorders default to an automatic white balance mode. The only serious downside to this is that you can definitely see the white balance shifting around and breathing in uncontrolled lighting situations, and sometimes under fluorescent lights. It's almost always a good idea to at least lock down the white balance when you shoot. A more serious issue, and one of the primary reasons why amateur video often looks so gray and washed out, is that a number of different color temperature lights illuminate a single scene. While careful white balancing is certainly a part of why this particular video looks so good, a larger factor is that we have a very controlled 3200 K lighting situation. Being in a living room scene with incandescent bulbs at 2800 K mixed with sunlight streaming in from the windows is a recipe for a chromatic disaster, no matter how carefully you white balance your camera. Unfortunately, dealing with mixed lighting is a topic for another segment of Djtv. If you have any questions about this or any other technical topics, we'd be happy to help you out. Just drop the tech team an email or give us a call. As Arthur C. Clarke remarked, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And indeed, it can sometimes seem like our 21st century computers and software are the answer to all of our video problems. But, like so many things, real solutions are very often low-tech. In today's segment, we're going to talk about the magic of green screen keying. Ironically, by the end, I hope you'll see why technology is not the problem or the magical solution to chroma keying challenges. Chroma keying is an extremely appealing effect, even if you just want to try it for fun. And there are few better justifications in life than fun. Unfortunately, most first attempts quickly reveal that keying is not all that easy. It's tempting to think that you'd get better results if you just had better technology, better software, or a better camera, for example. And to some extent, you're right. But before you get out your credit cards, you should understand a little bit about how keying works. We can key out or make transparent anything on the screen that the computer can isolate from anything else. We can focus on the color or chroma information and make everything that is, say, red transparent, or everything that is blue transparent, or anything that is green, for example. Or we can make everything that is bright transparent, or everything that is dark. This is known as luma keying. Performing the actual key is trivial with professional level editing software, provided of course that you have source footage that has enough contrast to isolate a particular set of pixels. The most common color of keying in this age of digital video is green. There are a couple of reasons why we use green as opposed to any other color. Not insignificantly, bright green is just not that common of a color for clothing for most people. Even the olive green earth tones that I'm wearing here are significantly different from the pure bright green of this wall, that it doesn't cause too many problems. So, what color green should you use? Roscoe Laboratories, for example, produces a very high quality chroma key green paint for around $65 a gallon. You can also get fabrics and gaffer's tape to match. While there's no question that using quality materials like these is a very good way to go, there honestly isn't anything magic about custom video paints or the particular shade of green they use. Your local hardware store will have no problems mixing up bright green acrylic paints with a matte finish that will work very well for chroma key applications. The real secret is getting the background as uniform as possible and as distinct from the subject as possible, so our software can take care of the rest. Whether you're talking about HD television, DVD movies, or video shot by a camcorder, digital video ends up being compressed. One way we can compress information in an image to make storage, transmission, and processing more efficient is to reduce the amount of color information. Since the human visual system perceives detail mainly in the relative brightness of a scene, luminance is the part of a color video signal that you want to spend most of your digital budget on. You'll recall that computer monitors use a red, green, blue color space, but color television and video cameras use a different color space, which can be identified as YCC. A digitized video signal therefore has one luma channel and two chroma channels. In an uncompressed video signal, for every sample of luminance, we also sample each of the chroma channels. By convention, this gives us a ratio of 4 to 4 to 4. NTSC DV, DVCam, and DVC Pro sample color data at a 4 to 1 to 1 ratio, which means that for a 720 sample scan line, we get 720 luma samples, but only 180 chroma samples. During playback and processing, this chroma information is interpolated across all of the pixels, so you don't get color banding like our illustration shows. The point is that we get a full resolution frame in black and white, but we have significantly reduced color resolution. There's no way around the fact that you cannot get pixel-perfect keys, especially for vertical edges, in the DV color space. But that doesn't mean it can't be done. Most professional level editing software packages have an eyedropper tool that will let you select the background color and a small range of hues around it to key out to compensate for small variations. More advanced techniques in software will let you pick more individual colors to key, essentially letting you apply a key multiple times. Advanced controls to adjust the edges of the key can really help with DV footage, so look for smoothing controls, matte chokers, and matte feathering options. Even this very nearly perfect key that we're looking at right here took our editor Chris Gates quite a bit of time and quite a bit of tweaking to perfect. While you will never get a perfect key with the DV format, it is definitely possible to get results that are completely satisfactory in most situations. Getting a good key is not hard. Getting it perfect takes time and a little patience. If you have any questions about this or any other technical topic, drop the tech team an email or give us a call. We'd be happy to help you out with this or any other technical questions you might have. Those of us who shoot video often wish that our video looked more like film. We've grown up with film, watching it in theaters and seeing it on TV. There are a broad range of techniques and technical tricks you can use to make the video you shoot look more like film. In this segment of Techno, we're going to discuss the legendary look of film and explore a few ideas you can apply to your videography to give it a more cinematic appeal. As videographers, we should just admit that if we shot video with cinematic techniques and lighting, we'd get much closer to the film look than we'd get by simply going out and buying the latest Magic 24p camera. Let's distinguish here first between a film effect and the film look. Many editing applications come with built-in effects that can make your video look like a scratched and dusty old film. These effects have their place, but that's not what we're shooting for here. In the next few minutes, we're going to start with the simplest, easiest, cheapest, and most important aspects that we can control to get the film look, and work up to the more subtle and often more expensive digital effects. The most obvious difference between film and video, even to the most casual couch potato, is square TV versus rectangular movies. Television has a 4:3 aspect ratio. Widescreen television and DVDs come in at 16:9, and Hollywood movies often have much wider aspect ratios than that. You should start your quest for the mythic film look by shooting 16:9 video. Even if you don't own a 16:9 camera, you can shoot video that you have carefully framed for 16:9 or wider and add letterboxing in post. Of course, you're throwing away 25% or more of your frame and image data when you do this, but the effect is simple and dramatic. Another simple but slightly more subtle variable you can play with is the shutter speed on your camcorder. High shutter speeds can result in sharper images that result in a more signature video look than the often softer look of film. It's often not a bad idea to match your shutter speed to your camera's frame rate, which we'll discuss in a moment. For many DV camcorders, this means a 1/60th of a second shutter speed. In brightly lit scenes, such as outdoors on a sunny day, this is going to mean you're going to need to stop down your aperture, which increases the depth of field, which in turn yields a less cinematic look. For this reason, you want to have a couple of different neutral density filters on hand, so you can open that aperture back up and slow the shutter speed down. Newer HD formats and cameras can shoot in a true progressive scan mode, but the more common DV format is an inherently interlaced format. There's no getting around that fact. Getting progressive video out of interlaced DV means some kind of de-interlacing process. Less important than progressive scanning is the actual frame rate. Film is traditionally shot and displayed in movie theaters at 24 progressive frames per second, otherwise known as the magical 24p. Televisions in the US are locked into displaying 60 fields per second, or 30 frames per second if you've deinterlaced the frame so that both fields display the same image data. Even if you have a 24p source, such as a vintage Arriflex moving picture camera or a brand new true 24p digital camera, most likely you'll be distributing to an audience watching interlaced television, at least if you want the widest possible viewership for your program. The conversion from 24p source to 60i is not a new process. In fact, it's been around for as long as movies have been shown on television. The process is called telecine. Involves a pull down that spreads the 24 frames across the 60 fields. There are two common pull downs, 2.3 and Panasonic's newer 2.332, as first used in the DVX100. As you can see in this animation, single fields extracted from a frame of film do not correspond one-to-one to the fields of video, and indeed, a single frame of film can actually span multiple frames of video. And it's all pretty heady stuff, but in the end, telecine pull-down maintains the aesthetic of the 24p film look pretty well. The reverse of this process, that is converting 60i video to 24p, is an inverse telecine process that's not commonly known as push-ups. This is how video is converted and printed to film. It's also a process that you could use to convert source 60i footage to 24p, and it can be as simple as dropping your 60i footage into a 24p project in your professional level editing software, and then rendering out the finished movie to a 24p format. Unfortunately, buying the latest HD camera and shooting in 24p will not make your video look like film. There are many other factors that make the film look like film, including sensitivity of film to light, to the range of colors it can capture, right down to the size of the grains of silver halide salts that record the image. The really bad news is that if you want the film look, you're going to need to shoot film. There are, however, some very impressive and interesting plugins that you can use to simulate film with enough detail to even imitate particular stocks of film. DigiFX, Cinelook, and Red Giant's Magic Bullet are two fine examples, and there are others. Keep in mind that these are $800 to $900 apps, and they're primarily for creating subtle and realistic simulations of film and are neither toys nor magical tools to rescue bad video. If you have any questions about this or any other technical topic, drop the tech team an email or give us a call. We'd be happy to help you out with this or any other technical questions you might have. And remember, there are no technical solutions to artistic problems, so don't let technology get in the way of your creativity. Digital video is always delivered in a compressed format. Whether you're watching the game in HD over digital cable, watching a DVD, or, hypothetically, watching a clip on the internet, you're watching compressed video. And more often than not, when you're watching compressed video, you're probably watching something that is loosely referred to as MPEG video. In this segment of Techno, we're going to dip into the history of MPEG, reveal how it works deep down, and talk about the future of digital video. MPEG is an acronym for Moving Picture Experts Group, which is a committee of the ISO-IEC that was established in 1988 to develop audio and video encoding standards. The group's work is incredibly important since it describes how digital audio and video are delivered and allows technologies such as digital cable and DVD movies to be universally accessible. The MPEG-1 standard was the first audio and video standard from the MPEG committee and was the basis of the video CD or VCD, which was the first digital disc-based format for movies. It is the most widely compatible MPEG format, so it is still in use, for example, in video for PowerPoint and on the web. Since the DVD video format has superseded the VCD, you might think that MPEG-1 is on the way out, but MPEG-1 audio lives on as songs in the MP3 format, which is really a contraction of MPEG-1 Audio Layer 3. All MPEG video up through the latest standards works in essentially the same way as MPEG-1 video does. There are two types of compression that occur: intra-frame compression and inter-frame compression. Intra, or within-frame compression, is easy to understand and familiar, even if the actual mathematics are a bit complex, since it's essentially the same as the digital compression used on still images and photos. The other way that MPEG video is digitally compressed is inter-frame, which is compression between different frames of video. Individual frames are compared to one another and duplicate information is removed. When one frame changes very little from the next, efficient MPEG encoding can save a lot of space. MPEG-2 is the next standard that came out of the committee and exploded onto the scene as DVD video, digital television and satellite. While MPEG-1 video supported only a relatively small range of data rates, MPEG-2 is scalable and supports rates from 1.5 megabits per second to as high as 40 megabits per second, although you'll typically see data rates less than 9 megabits per second for DVD and a little less than that for digital cable. Inter-frame compression for MPEG-2 is quite interesting. Like other MPEG video standards, it involves three types of frames. I-frames, which are full frames using only intra-frame compression. P-frames, which are predictive frames that are generated based on the nearest previous I or P frame. And B-frames, which are bidirectional frames that use both past and subsequent frames as a reference. If you could look at an MPEG-2 stream as it was being decoded, you might initially find that only 1 in every 12 frames is actually visible. These are the I-frames, and they're not unlike the JPEG photos you see on the internet. As the stream is processed, the P-frames are calculated and rendered based on the nearest previous I-frame or P-frame. Finally, the B-frames would be calculated and rendered based on the nearest I and P frames. Like other MPEG standards, MPEG-2 is a patented and proprietary technology, which means that a licensing fee is required for usage. Although the fee is usually pretty small per user, it's not free. Any editing application that can create DVDs has some sort of MPEG-2 encoder in it. One of the most common MPEG-2 encoders on the Windows platform is from Main Concept, which you'll find branded in video and DVD products from Adobe, Sony, and ULEAD, for example. MPEG-3 was the next format standard developed by the group. Not to be confused with MP3 music files, MPEG-3 was originally designed to handle Djtv signals with data rates of between 20 and 40 megabits per second. But it turned out that MPEG-2 could be extended to handle those rates, and MPEG-3 became unnecessary. MPEG-4 is designed to deliver DVD quality video at even lower data rates than MPEG-2, with the only catch being that you need a lot more processing horsepower to decode the stream. While the MPEG-4 specification contains all kinds of parts that support 3D objects, sprites, text, and other media types, the really interesting part of the spec for digital video producers is Part 10. MPEG-4 Part 10 is also known as Advanced Video Coding, AVC, or H.264. H.264 video can hit quality levels that are equal to DVD video at nearly half the data rate, which is absolutely remarkable. At least part of the reason for this is that the H.264 B frames can reference up to 32 other frames in a group of pictures. H.264 also does much better than MPEG-2 at lower data rates and frame sizes and is very streamable, making it ideal for web-based video and even cell phones. And H.264 scales up to HD resolutions as well, and is part of the spec for both Blu-ray and HD DVD. Pragmatically, we've seen variations of MPEG-4 pop up in lots of places, from QuickTime to Windows Media Video. While the Microsoft codec, as implemented in Windows Media 10, varies from the H.264 standard somewhat, and indeed Microsoft has codec technology that competes with it, QuickTime, Sorensen Media, Main Concept, and others have all released compliant H.264 encoding solutions. The MPEG committee continues with ever-advanced video standards, detailed in the MPEG-7 and MPEG-21 specifications, for example, and I'm sure we'll cover those here as they become relevant in the future. For today, however, that's all the MPEG we have time for. Thanks for watching. Cameras are pretty simple. You point, press a little button, and the shutter opens briefly to record an image. Video cameras are a little different, however, and the shutter affects your moving images in different ways. In this segment of Techno, we're going to take a step through the looking glass of the video camera lens and look at how the imaging chip we find there interacts with the shutter. More importantly, we'll show you how you can use the shutter on your camcorder to affect the look of your video. If the lens of a camcorder is analogous to, well, the lens in your eye, then the image sensor in your camcorder is analogous to the retina. There are two primary types of image sensors in today's camcorders, the CCD and a CMOS. The traditional CCD, or charge-coupled device, simply gathers up light and dumps an electrical signal to some other circuitry in your camcorder that processes that signal. CMOS chips, or complementary metal oxide semiconductors, are integrated circuits that combine a microprocessor and some memory together onto a single chip, and they're found in all kinds of different devices. In a digital camera or camcorder, the CMOS also contains an analog image sensor. The difference with the CMOS chip is that the capture, processing, and temporary storage of the image data all happens on a single chip, which is more efficient and, not incidentally, cheaper to manufacture, which is probably not an insignificant reason why the camcorder industry is moving to CMOS cameras. Let's sum up this discussion by saying that inside of your camcorder there is some kind of image sensor that is collecting light for some period of time and then dumping data of some type to storage. It's doing that at a periodic rate that's often tied to the format of the video you are shooting. So, for example, when shooting 60 interlaced fields a second for NTSC television in the United States, the imaging sensor would dump data to storage at 60 Hertz. The exposure, just like in a film camera, is partially determined by how long the image sensor spends bathed in light. At 60 Hertz, this equates to a 1/60th of a second shutter speed. And indeed, this is a very good reason to leave your NTSC camcorder shutter speed control at 1/60th of a second in almost all situations. Changing the shutter speed to something else is done for two reasons. One, to adjust the exposure, and two, for effect. Just like the shutter in a still camera snaps open and determines how long the film is exposed to light, so a camcorder shutter can be adjusted to control how long the image sensor is exposed, with one important difference. Most camcorders don't have a physical mechanical shutter. Instead, most camcorders have an electronic shutter, but the effect is the same. Doubling the shutter speed to 1/120th of a second will roughly half the amount of light coming in. The primary tool you should use to control exposure, however, is the aperture, which controls the size of the opening in front of the image sensor. The aperture is, however, also very important in controlling the depth of field. To summarize a rather complex conversation in optical physics, the larger the aperture, the shallower the depth of field. Artistically, a shallow depth of field gives us more control over what is and what isn't in focus in our scene. Sometimes having everything in focus is good, but other times it's just plain boring. In order to keep the aperture open as wide as possible, we'll need to decrease the exposure in some other way. Neutral density filters are ideal for this, but you can also use faster shutter speeds. Any motion that happens while the shutter is open will be blurred across the image chip and the resulting image. This isn't necessarily a bad thing. Remember, we're talking about full motion video here, so the blurring is more of a look or a feel than a flaw. It's lovely here in sunny Florida this time of year, so let's take a field trip outside and I'll show you what I mean. We're shooting 24p video here with a 1/24th of a second shutter. Each frame is getting one open shutter, and if we look at a still frame, we can see quite a bit of blur. If we double the shutter speed to 1/48th of a second, which is a default, our still image grabs shows less blurring. If we bump the shutter speed up to 1/120th of a second, there will be even less light coming in and also less blurring, at least if we look at a still frame. At higher and higher shutter speeds, the effect becomes even more pronounced. I want to emphasize here, this is what the still frames look like, which really doesn't give you much of a clue as to what the full motion video will look like. Higher shutter speeds give your video a techie, edgy, sharp look that you'll see used in science fiction shows on television sometimes. Slower shutter speeds can result in a softer, more filmic look. Take a look at this stream of water at different shutter speeds. The difference here is quite dramatic. Like many of the tech topics that we talk about here, it's not necessarily about the right and wrong shutter speed. It's about understanding the technology so you can get the look that you want. If you have any questions about this or any other technical topic, drop the tech team an email or give us a call. We'd be happy to help you out with this or any other technical questions you might have. Over the last dozen segments of Techno, we've tackled interesting, relevant, pragmatic technical topics in some detail. In this segment, however, we're going to explore some more esoteric and fun little asides that we're going to call Techno Trivia. We're going to hunt down the drop frames and drop frame timecode, show you why 24 frame per second film really isn't 24 frames per second, debunk the myths surrounding the naming of the B and C connection, resurrect the Laserdisc, and even visit Fraggle Rock. The broadcast television specification in the United States was defined in the 1950s by the NTSC. Due to some odd technical limitations, it just was not possible to display a television signal with a frame rate that matched an even 60 Hz or 30 frames per second. The brilliant engineering solution was to tweak the rate just a tiny bit to 29.97 frames per second. Synchronizing this strange decimal frame rate with real-world clocks is not entirely straightforward, but it's important if you want frame-accurate editing and if you want your audio to remain in sync with your video. And so we have an equally strange way of counting frames of NTSC video known as SMPTE drop frame timecode. SMPTE drop frame displays frame numbers like this: hours, minutes, seconds, semicolon, and frames. The semicolon indicates that this is drop frame timecode, which might raise the question, where does that drop frame go, and doesn't this screw up my video? Drop frame timecode does not actually drop any frames of video at all. Instead, it's just a method for counting the frames, and in the counting, 2 frame numbers are skipped every minute, so that the next frame after frame 29 is frame 2 instead of frame 0 as you might expect. They should really call it drop number time code, but nothing is really ever that simple in video production, is it? Actually, it's not here either. The real rule for numbering frames in SMPTE drop frame timecode is that the frame numbers 00 and 01 are skipped every minute, except for minutes ending in 0, for example the first minute and the 10th minute and so on. The point is that no frames are actually dropped. You can let your software worry about counting them. We all know that movie theaters project film at a 24 frame per second frame rate. While there are great artistic reasons to pursue 24p video, the initial decision to go with 24 frames per second nearly 80 years ago was a simple one. That's the slowest possible rate that sound can be encoded on film. Since film stock is very expensive, 24 frames per second was initially a miserly and pragmatic choice and not an aesthetic one. Film doesn't just slide across the lens in a continuous stream in a projector. This would only create a top to bottom blur on the screen. Instead, a frame is pulled into a gate and held there for a moment, 24 times a second, with the shutter blocking the lamp while the film is in transit into the gate. It turns out, however, that displaying pictures on a screen at a rate of 24 Hertz is simply too slow for the human visual perceptual system, which can detect a distinct and annoying flicker at that speed. To solve this issue, film projectors in theaters have mechanical shutters that rotate in front of the lamp with a flicker reducing rate of 2 or 3 times the frame rate. This means that you're actually seeing 48 or 72 images a second, even though the frame rate is indeed 24 frames per second. The BNC connector is a type of RF connector used with coaxial cable. The connector uses a bayonet-style locking mechanism and can be found in professional electronic gear of all sorts, including professional video hardware. The signal it can transmit is not unlike the component video signal you'll find on consumer AV equipment, but the coaxial cable and the locking mechanism make it much more robust. Just what does the initialism BNC stand for? It's smaller than an N-type connector named for the engineer and inventor Paul Neal, so maybe it stands for Baby N connector. The connection was also extensively used by the British Navy and is sometimes called a British Naval connector. Then again, the BNC connector has been extensively used by almost everyone, and it was invented by American engineers Paul Neal and Carl Councilman almost 40 years ago. The B is pretty easy. It stands for bayonet. One nickname for the BNC is the bayonet nut connector. The most common explanation of what BNC stands for, from old engineering textbooks to the brand new Wikipedia, is that it's named after Neal and Councilman. Bayonet Neal Councilman. This makes some sense since the N connector was invented by Neal and the C connector was invented by Mr. Councilman. But wouldn't it make more grammatical sense to call it a Neal Councilman bayonet connector? We discussed the technology of mats and masks in an earlier segment of Techno. The earliest examples of mats are the glass matte paintings used in the backgrounds in films. One step more complex than a stilled glass matte painting is a matte that moves or travels in the background. In your editing software, when you want to use an animated digital matte that moves, you'll often access a feature or effects or menu item that might be called a track matte key or a traveling matte. The 1980s Jim Henson show Fraggle Rock featured a character named Matt who traveled to faraway lands to explore outer space. His full name? Traveling Matt, of course. Did you catch the name of Traveling Matt's nephew too? Yep, Gobo. Gobos, or cookies, are lighting tools that Perry Jenkins discussed in EP 105 of Production Notes. Before HD, DVD, and Blu-ray discs, before DVD video discs, and yes, even before CD audio discs were introduced in 1983, Hollywood distributed movies on laser discs. The Laserdisc was invented back in 1958, and the first discs arrived on the market in 1978, nearly 20 years before DVD movies exploded into our living rooms. Laserdiscs are far superior to videotape in both quality and convenience, since they're random access and don't need to be rewound. Sounds an awful lot like an older and bigger version of DVD video discs, doesn't it? But actually, Laserdiscs are much more closely related to an even more ancient technology, the vinyl phonograph record. Superficially, Laserdiscs and LP records are the same size, but they are also technically similar on a much deeper groove. Just like record albums, Laserdiscs are analog. That's all the techno trivia we have time for today. I hope you filed a few factoids away that you can bore your relatives with at your next family gathering. Until the next time, the Techno team is still here, as always, to answer your more serious and pressing questions. So feel free to drop us a line or send us a note.
That's another adventure from Gobo's uncle, Traveling Matt.
That was wonderful!
Yes.
Wasn't that wonderful, Gobo?
Yes.
That was wonderful, Gobo's
Yes.
Uncle Matt!
The effect can become even more pronounced. I want to emphasize it. A little bit of gel, a little bit of brush, that's all you need. All happens on a single chip, which is more efficient than a CCD. Oh, we got our script all rehearsed. Let's go into the studio. About ready to shoot here. We got some lights set up. We got our camera, teleprompter, and obviously because we're in a controlled studio situation here, these lights pretty much sit here all the time, so it's easy to get started. And then right before we shoot, we just need to do some final tweaks to get the lighting right. It's pretty easy, but then again, I'm not doing the lighting.
Techno. The name Techno is one that Eric came up with. We had several different ideas about what we'd call this. Was it going to be called tech support or something like that? But Eric said, he's like, give me overnight. Let me go home and think about this and I'll come up with something catchy. And he came back with Techno, which, I mean, it's a great name. Get the whole idea of techno, but it's Techno. Love the play on words.
Yeah, initially we were all doing our own shows all by ourselves, so each of us was writing our own scripts and then shooting ourselves, which is really pretty hard to control the camera and the teleprompter and stay on target, so that was really challenging.
Shows about technology are almost the castor oil of TV shows like this, of instructional video or of TV shows. People are intimidated by technology. They're afraid of it. They don't want to admit that they don't know things. It doesn't always come across as fun, but there's information here that is so valuable. It's so important to know about audio sample rates, to know about shutter speed and frame rates and how that affects your productions. And Eric is one of the smartest guys I know. The guy speaks Mandarin Chinese fluently. He's just got a mind that works so differently than mine. He thinks in the metric system. I don't get that, but he's the perfect guy to present these insights into technology, to teach you how things work and what they're all about, and that's something that I have a great appreciation for, even though I don't have the ability to do it myself, which may be why I appreciate it so much. Eric's show is one that I enjoy watching each week because I learn from it. I mean, there's stuff that I learn from watching Eric's show, and that to me makes it a good show. There's something there every week that I guarantee there's going to be something new, no matter who you are, that you're going to learn from watching techno.
when you visualize that information. And working on such a tight schedule to be able to visualize all the information in that show can be very difficult, especially when we're creating B-roll and putting everything together for the other shows. Fortunately, Brent Milby, who's our animator, has been able to put together illustrations that really make that show happen.
The way it works, Eric just gives me, the concept. He'll explain exactly how it works to me so that I understand it, and then I'll figure out a graphical way to represent it. A lot of times he'll do a little thumbnail, like a napkin sketch or something. It looks like this, or like this. It looks like that. It's not much, it doesn't make a lot of sense, but while, we're sitting here talking about it, it makes sense to me, and then I put it on screen. This is the MPEG stream animation, and I didn't know a thing about MPEG compression at all.
The real strength of the techno segments is the content end of it. I'm really confident in the writing and the subject matter and the research that goes into it, because that's, I really have a lot of experience there. So I think we're not going to run out of topics next season for techno. There's still a whole bunch of different things we can write about. And since we focused so heavily on video this season, it's going to be really fun to talk more about audio, maybe about print, a lot of other different things that we can start talking about that will be really interesting. And I kind of hope I'm going to be a little more natural on camera this next season too. That'll be fun. I thought you guys might want to see a little bit behind the sets here at the techno set. This is Digital Juice's smaller studio, and when I mean small, it's pretty small. Come on over here. We're about 2 meters from the camera and teleprompter and our studio monitor here. That's all the bigger it is. The teleprompter is a relatively new addition. Before we got this, probably after episode 3 or 4 or so, we were memorizing all our lines, which is a little bit challenging, especially if you're not so good on camera. The teleprompter consists of some software. You can see down here we're running on a laptop. Normally, you'd put the teleprompter glass directly in front of the camcorder, or directly behind the teleprompter here, you can see that. But in this case, we've actually put the teleprompter to the side of the camera, and the reason why is I have an eye condition. I have amblyopic, which is otherwise known as lazy eye, which causes my eyes to drift. It's been corrected cosmetically, but we discovered that when I read a teleprompter that's directly in front of the lens, it looks like I'm looking just off to camera right, which is pretty darn distracting. Anyhow, it turns out, in my case, we didn't even need to buy an expensive teleprompter. We could have just put a laptop next to it.
For whatever reason, I'm not sure why or where this came from, the man loves monkeys. There's something about monkeys that just Eric Franks can't resist. So in almost everything he's ever worked on, whether it's a manual or a magazine or a video, if you look really, really close, maybe not 100%, but I'm pretty confident that if you look close, you're going to see some kind of monkey.
We're going to explore how alpha channel transparency works and how you can get perfect takes for your video. Okay, in an uncompressed video signal. And zoom the camera in on it and push the white balance button, but it covers up the teleprompter, which makes the teleprompter hard to read. For example, we can focus on chroma information and make everything that is red transparent. Up. This is going to be horrible. This is going to be a long afternoon. See, I just can't do anything except read the prompter. Can't even look at a freaking light bulb. They also have how chroma keying works. I guess I'm not ready. can cover this up with the animation there, Chris, don't you think? Yes, I think we can. If you have any questions about this or any other technical topics, feel free to give the tech team a call or drop us an email. And just remember, there are no artistic solutions to your there are no technical solutions to your artistic problems. Run out of tape here. Scattered throughout the 13 episodes of Techno this season, you may have noticed a number of archival film clips. We use these clips to illustrate one point or another, but we also really like them because they helped us connect what seems like baffling modern 21st century technology with a much deeper history. The source of all of these is the Prelinger Archives, which you can find at archive.org under the Moving Pictures section. The Prelinger Archives is a collection of over 48,000 ephemeral films from advertising, educational, and industrial sources from between 1927 and 1987. There are a few famous films in the collection, but most of the films are obscure works that would otherwise be lost forever if they were not preserved in the Prelinger Archives. Even more amazing, the archive has made about 2,000 of these films available online as public domain media under a Creative Commons license. The Story of Television from 1956 documents RCA's participation in the invention of television. Hosted by RCA Chairman David Sarnoff and inventor Vladimir Zworykin, the short does not get off to a great start, since Sarnoff is apparently worse at reading cue cards and even more comfortable on camera than I am.
And since that time, as you know, RCA has spent another $70 million to pioneer and develop the compatible color television system.
Still, there's some great historical footage of very early television from the 1930s, some interesting shots of televisions being manufactured, and some great animations that show roughly how broadcast television works even today.
1931. Atop the Empire State Building, the National Broadcasting Company, a service of RCA, erected the transmitting antenna for experimental television station W2XBS. Now, RCA's technicians and scientists tackled the next goal, improvement of picture quality. Hitherto, using a mechanical process, the best that could be transmitted was a crude signal of 60 scanning lines. RCA turned to the new science of electronics, discarded the mechanical spinning disc, and soon doubled, tripled, then tripled again the scanning lines.
The title of this 1963 Calvin Workshops film is impossible to pronounce, since it was ostensibly typed by a monkey. The Calvin Workshop was one of the major producers of educational and industrial films a few decades ago, but this film was clearly made for entertainment purposes only. It features monkeys, well, technically a chimpanzee, making a movie. Monkeys shooting, monkeys editing, monkey sound guys, a monkey director, and a monkey actor. It'll make you smile, but probably not laugh out loud. The film actually seems to only be a rough cut, really, but it is interesting to see the film technology from that era.